Hello and welcome to Hacking State. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is the Kino Corner.
Hey, what's up?
Hey man, how you doing?
Uh, Pretty good. I'm not hungover, so doing pretty good.
Great. So I originally contacted you because I wanted to talk about sort of film as a technology and as a medium itself. For those of you who don't know, the Kino Corner is, I guess you could explain it a little bit more, but I'll just say that it's really a great and cozy YouTube channel dedicated to movie reviews and just cinephile type things in general.
Yeah,
Um,
it's cinephile type things in general because um I do reviews every now and then.
mhm.
And it's only if it's only really if I see the movie early. Like I saw The Whale like a month and a half early, so I was like, okay, well, since I'm seeing it before everybody else, I should just make a review of it. And then I saw
Right.
Asteroid City like 2 weeks early, so I was like, since I saw it early, I should make a review of it. But if I see the movie when everyone else is seeing it, then I don't see the point of me doing a review. It's like the people who are going to see it have seen it. Um, and uh, and it's analysis of film, it's film history, it's me sort of just recommending weird little movies that I like, and sometimes it's me getting technical.
Mhm.
Uh, but I don't do the technical stuff as much. One of the reasons is that people tell me they find the technical stuff boring, which just kind of blows my mind because I find the technical stuff to be the most compelling. Like, how did they get this? How did they achieve this? Like, one of the coolest things was in the movie Ad Astra with Brad Pitt,
Mhm.
movie I really like. Uh, and I made this video, and in the video, I kind of detailed how they achieved the moon sequence,
Mhm.
which you watch it and you're like, wow, that actually does look like the moon, and you kind of just assume they shot it in the studio and it was CGI. No, they shot it in the desert in Southern California. So they made the moon rovers, right? And they went out to the desert in Southern California and they were doing all the action sequences there, which honestly must have been really fun. But and they had a double camera setup. So one camera was a 35 millimeter film camera, and then the camera that was like right next to it, capturing basically the same image, was a digital camera, an Arri Alexa that was fitted to shoot infrared. So basically,
Mhm.
what that did was it would the bright sky would just be black, like a
Mhm.
very deep black, because you might get the wrong impression if you played Starfield, but if you're on the moon, the sky is black. Like, in Starfield, you go on the moon and you see all the stars in the sky, and you're like, I don't know if I would see all that. And and then they composited the two images. Uh, they composited the two images so they would get that deep black sky. Turn the sand gray through color correction, and then they had to digitally take out the different bits of flora that were on the ground, and boom, you have the moon. I thought that was pretty neat. I thought that was a
Yeah.
neat way to shoot it. And people are
Um,
like,
so
"Oh, that's boring," and I'm like,
so you
"What?"
mean like people are not into like the sort of cinematography type stuff?
No, people aren't into the cinematography type stuff. It's like I would love to talk about, like, get really autistic about how they lit the scene or something, but
Mhm.
you then have to think about who's the cinematography, like how many people actually want to be cinematographers. And when you're dealing with YouTube at mass scale, you know I have 137,000 subscribers. There's probably only about 137,000 people out there who want to be cinematographers, and I doubt that most of them even know who I am. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people are just like movies, and I kind of get it too, because they don't want the magic ruined. They don't want to know the technical details. So they don't want the magic, ruined, or or something.
I
But
I
film,
had
I
a I
mean,
had a
it was
film
ruined a long time ago.
like a film production studio class whatever instructor in high school, and
Hmm.
this guy managed to like get this whole thing to be kind of a big deal in the school. So we got to do, like we had like our own fake news station, and we got to produce like short films and stuff like that. And one of the things he would always do is he would start out when you would begin the class by like going through, he was a big like Alfred Hitchcock fan, and so we'd
Oh yeah,
watch like the
Hitchcock's
Hitchcock
great.
movies, and then he would, we would like learn about how they set up those scenes, and the shots for
Hmm.
those old movies when technologically it was a lot more difficult.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot more work too. People think that you know, people think that you can make a movie in a day, basically. I mean, that's kind of their assumption. It's strange
Like,
because
you have an iPhone, don't you?
oh my gosh. So I got a funny story about that. So the guy who made the movie Tangerine,
Mm.
Sean Baker, um, all of his other movies are shot on film. But because he made Tangerine on an iPhone, uh, people are like, "You have an iPhone?" Like that really kick-started the, "You have an iPhone, don't you? You can just make a movie right now. You don't need anything." I'm like,
Mm.
well, even if I did have an iPhone, I would need attachments for that, lens attachments. I would need special rigs for the iPhone. I still need lights. I still need to hire all the same crew members that you still have to hire for everything, gaffer, grips, DP, sound guy, hair and makeup, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I'd still have a production designer, set dressers. Like I still have to get all these people. So the iPhone, like shooting on an iPhone, doesn't exactly bring the cost down by a lot because most of the costs are not actually in the camera. Uh, but it's funny because he shot Tangerine on an iPhone, and at a Q&A, somebody who was like gushing about him shooting on an iPhone asked him why he made that decision. And he said, "Well, my producer told us that we didn't have money to shoot on film, so told me to choose a digital camera to shoot the movie with. And I said, well, they all look like shit. Let's just do it on an iPhone." And and so that was the reason. I think the movie had a budget of 100,000 or something, which outside of LA, um, you'd be able to shoot on film uh with 100K. The problem with LA, especially if you're trying to get locations, is that locations and permits can
Mm.
end up costing quite a bit, especially like private locations, because people in LA, they know how to play the game. They want to milk you for as much money as you can. So like in Austin, when I did my short film last month, um yeah, I did my short film in end of October, beginning of November. It's kind of a blur, but I didn't have to pay for any locations, so
Mm. Right.
that wouldn't be the case in LA.
So, I mean, the original pitch for this interview was that we're going to talk a little bit about, how films impact our conception of modernity and technology,
Hmm.
and maybe even whether they're pointing at the future. Um, One of the things that's interesting about film is we sort of go back and remember a time
Hmm.
that in a lot of cases, lots of people that we know actually lived through the film that is almost always made after the fact, uh,
Yeah.
accounting for that time. So film becomes this interesting um, retconning of history, where
Hmm.
like if you look at films that take place in the 70s or films that take place in the 1980s, most of the time are not being made in those eras, especially if they're really trying to go for to be a period piece, right?
Yeah.
And yet those end up being the landmark films that we refer to when we think about those periods of times.
Yeah. If you want a real movie about the '70s, watch Taxi Driver, uh,
Mhm. Yeah,
ta-
that's one of the
or
ones I was thinking of.
a Hal Ashby movie like
Mhm.
The Last Detail or Being There or Coming Home or Shampoo, uh, or Harold and Maude. I think yeah, because he made pretty much contemporary films. Hal Ashby did. So did Cassavetes, but Taxi Driver even more so, just because they were shooting on the streets of New York, And one of the funny anecdotes about the film is that they were shooting it during the garbage strikes of New York. And you don't really ever see movies that take place in 70s New York that include the garbage strikes, because if you look at the streets in Taxi Driver, it's just filled with trash. That wasn't the set dressing. That
Mhm.
was just real. And they said that it stank so much outside when they were shooting Taxi Driver that it was almost unbearable at times. So if and I think that they just took the camera because New York is a different permitting system. If you don't have your camera on sticks, you don't have to get a permit. So I think a lot of the people in there were real people. I mean, same with Midnight Cowboy. Famously, when John Boyd and Dustin Hoffman were crossing the street, the taxi did hit him because those other people weren't extras. They just had him crossing the street talking, and got the line, "I'm walking here,"
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Right. So, are there any films being made now that you think do a good job of casting, or I guess not being made, but have been made recently that do a really good job of casting the overall feel of today? Because one criticism is that our external environment hasn't changed a lot in some
Yeah,
ways.
what was a really kind of interesting commentary, was, I think it was from the director's commentary of Boyhood. When Richard Linklater set out to make Boyhood, part of what he set out to do was he thought that over 12 years there would be a major cultural change from the late 90s to 2012.
Mhm.
Because if you look at the cultural changes from, say, 1986 to 1998, I mean, there were major fashion changes. There was a major music shift. There were like external signifiers where we can look back now, look at, say, a film or a photo or something, and be able to tell if it was mid 80s or if it was mid 90s. And what he noted is that uh, he was like, actually, not a whole lot changed. Um, you know, yeah, computers got better. The iPhone was introduced, but people generally dress the same. The fashion changed a little bit, but not in any kind of meaningful way. Uh, Cars, you know, yeah, cars from the late 90s do look different than cars from the 2000s, but not by huge metrics.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, and I think that, 2008, the financial crisis of 2008, uh didn't help anything when people just were having older things. Like, I mean, in 2012, I was driving a car from 2000. A lot of my friends were driving like early 2000s cars.
I was driving a 1997 uh Buick in college.
Yeah, I was driving a
It was almost as
2000.
old as I was.
Yeah, I was driving a 2000 Chevy Silverado. Um and a lot of my friends were. And yeah, like, if in high school, like, if you looked at photos of like previous, graduating classes, uh, if you took out the year of our graduating classes from like maybe 2006 to 2012, and you ask somebody like today, like some Zoomer, like, put the years down, I don't think they'd be able to do it. Like, but as far as movies today that address modernity, well, it's hard to say because a lot of big directors now, I don't think are very I don't think they're very interested in modernity. You see, Wes Anderson has been doing period pieces for quite some time.
Mhm.
So has Paul Thomas Anderson. Christopher Nolan's new film takes place in the mid 20th century. Uh, uh, the Holdovers, the new Alexander Payne movie, takes place in 1970. A lot of these directors are making movies about the past. They're not really that interested in 2023. And then the movies that we did get that are of like modern times, it seems, want to have like this COVID slant on them, which is stupid. uh like no one wanted to see that. I feel like the whole like pandemic era is something that people are rightly just not interested in seeing on screen. It's kind of like, yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't I don't think
we kind
anyone
of want to
wants to be
forget that.
reminded of that. Just
Yeah.
like a black hole for 2 years that
Yeah,
we're gonna put away.
it's just like, look, it sucked. I don't want to see that on film. You know,
Right.
it sucked. Uh, the one director who's making interesting stuff. Uh, I mean, where we're seeing modernity in film is not from any kind of big movie. Um, so I know that my buddy Eugene Kotlarenko, uh, he just shot a new film. I know he's really focused on modernity, not just in what he shows, but how he shows it. So he started off making screen movies, which is like movies that take place entirely on a computer. Uh, then he made Wobble Palace with him, starring him and Dasha, and that was, I don't know, almost 10 years ago at this point. I think he made Wobble Palace. Maybe it was 2015. I forget the exact year. Uh, and that was shot more traditionally, but you
Mhm.
know, it's about like a modern kind of millennial romance sort of falling apart. You know, kind of Woody Allen-y type thing.
I had no
Uh,
idea that Josh was in this film.
yeah, that's actually, you know, it's so funny is that I hadn't listened to Red Scare or anything. I had
Mm,
heard people talk about Dasha. I had no idea who she was. I didn't know who she was until I saw Wobble Palace. So that's how I discovered, because I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts or anything. The
yeah.
one podcast I listen to more frequently, I guess, is the Bret Easton Ellis podcast. Um, and you know, and that's kind of it. So, so I guess I'm as cultured as the Gen Xer, but yeah. So I discovered her through that film, and then he made a movie called Spree with Joe Keery, which kind of combined a few different things. It's supposed to be like you're watching some insane guy's live stream for the whole film, and
Okay.
so he shot it with like GoPros and iPhones and uh you know, stuff that like a streamer would use.
Yeah.
Uh
So there's sort of
and
like an overlay of the internet, right?
yeah.
In all
Yeah.
these.
Yeah, in most of his films there's like this like internet overlay on it. And then so he's really going into not just the story being modern, but going into very much like the form of it being as modern as he can make it too. Uh and then someone who's doing modernity but is doing a little bit differently is a guy named Christopher Borgley, who I'm making a video about actually right now. Should be coming out, I don't know, this weekend. And he came out with two films this year. Well, one of his films technically released last year at Cannes, but when an indie movie releases at Cannes, it can take a year to actually release. Um, and his film that came out earlier this year is called Sick of Myself, and then his newest film is in theaters now. It's called Dream Scenario with Nicolas Cage, and he's going for talking. He's going for movies that sort of explore very modern ideas, especially modern ideas about the internet, modern ideas about woke culture and cancel culture, and how human relations have changed because of the internet. And but he's not going like full Eugene, because he still shoots on film and he still makes these movies look very like classical, or almost like they, you know, they look almost like 90s films, you know.
Mm.
So he's going for a more classical look. And I mean, I really like Borgley. um I like the classical look paired with a very kind of modern setting. uh and Dream Scenario and Sick of Myself both released this year. Sick of Myself is about a woman who will do anything for fame. So she disfigures her body to try to get famous on like Instagram.
Mm.
And then Dream Scenario is starring Nicolas Cage, and it's about this guy, and he starts showing up in everybody's dreams,
Yeah.
and he becomes like a viral sensation. But then once the dreams turn to nightmares, uh, he gets canceled. And so like the second half of the movie is about the whole like cancel culture, everything that he's going through in regards to that, and it becomes like this satire on uh, education, because he's a professor, satire on how education just buckles under the pressure of the students now, how the students are all pussies,
Mm.
and you know, and just kind of this modern sort of mob mentality that the internet really loves to help flourish, I guess.
I'm curious. I know that a lot of your audience doesn't like the technical stuff, but this is Hacking State, and we like technology. How does the like more classical look get achieved? Like what tactics does someone use to make a film look more like the 90s than
Well, I
today?
mean, it's easy to shoot on film.
Hmm.
Digital just uh digital digital just has an overall different look and feel to it. So like I'm a purist. I'm a film purist when it comes to my own projects because I like getting the classical look for the stuff that I do.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not a purist when it comes to films in general. Like I understand different directors have different intentions and whatnot. And so I enjoy movies shot on all sorts of different cameras and whatnot. But like something that kind of gets me is like, say you want to make a movie about the 60s and you shoot it on a digital camera, and then you uh and then you make it look very digital. uh like that's, I guess that's fine, but it doesn't exactly bring you back to the 60s. There's something just about the film grain, how the film picks up highlights a bit differently, how the film interprets colors a bit differently than digital, and uh how that just in our minds, right? Like because we're so used to watching movies from the 60s and the 20th century, and honestly, like digital wasn't a mainstream way to shoot movies up until like 2012.
Mm.
uh and it just is, I don't know, that it's like we've been conditioned to think that especially the grain patterns of film immediately puts us back aesthetically into um these different time periods. And for example, like when PTA made a Phantom Thread, he shot that on 35. Well, something to know about film as well is that film technology has actually gotten a lot better over the years.
Mm.
So if you shoot on 16 millimeter now, it like if you use 50D, which is the slowest 16 stock, and for everybody out there who maybe doesn't know much about film, the film that's really available now is just Kodak film. So there used to be Fuji and Orwo and these other companies, but now it's pretty much just Kodak. Um, and so you can shoot with 50D, 200T, 250D, or 500T. And then there's two different black and white stocks. There's Tri-X, which is a reversal, and then there's Double X, which is what I shot my short film on, which is a black and white negative. Uh, I don't think I would shoot anything completely on reversal film just because it's a little bit more finicky than
Mm.
negative film. But the slower the stock, the less grain it's going to have. So 500T is 500 ISO, 500 ASA. That's going to be grainier than 50D. That's going to be a lot grainier than 50D. So if you shoot 500, so if you shoot 50D 16, it actually kind of looks like 35 millimeter of the 80s or 90s. So that's a pretty easy way, and it's a cheaper way to make it look like something from the 20th century. Just because of the colors and the grain structure. Uh, Something that's been happening a bit recently on some movies. I think that the Holdovers did it, but I know for a fact that Dune and the Batman did this.
Mm.
Is that they've gone for this intermediate. um, this intermediate look where so I know for a fact that the Batman did this, but as I said, I'm kind of sure that the holdovers did it, but they haven't talked at length about this yet, so I'm gonna wait and see. Where so on the Batman, they shot the film on a digital camera. I believe it was like uh the Alexa 65 or the Alexa LF, one of the large format Alexa cameras. So they shot the film digitally on one of the large format digital cameras. And after they edited the film, they they printed it onto 65, 70 millimeter film, and then did a bleach bypass onto that print to change the overall look of it, and then scanned the film back to digital. So so that they would get some of the grain from it being on film stock, and they would soften it a little bit, uh, and then get like a real bleach bypass look to it instead of like a fake digital bleach bypass look to it. And so they did that as the finishing for the film, so that the movie, like the Batman, uh has doesn't look quite digital, but it doesn't look quite like film.
Mm,
And since they were going for a very stylized, almost 70s feeling to it, even though, I'm pretty sure it takes place in modern day, but they wanted it to feel kind of like modern, but not modern at the same time. It does achieve a pretty cool look. And the cinematographer for the Batman, Greg Fraser, is the same cinematographer for Dune, so it makes sense that he did the same thing on the Dune movies, where they after they finish editing the movie, they print it onto film and then rescan it back into digital to get
right.
this like intermediate look.
So, one of the things that I know is sort of interesting about you, at least compared to like, some other, there's a bunch of different, cinephile YouTube channels out there, some big ones, is that you also are, actively making your own films.
Hmm.
And so I'd be like, the dream of YouTube was sort of that it would enable this ultimately, that, it would
Yeah.
create all these new filmmakers. Um, and you are doing that in numerous capacities. And so I just wanted to ask you, like, has the fundamental like economics um, of filmmaking, of movie making changed, or, how does that go when you're an independent small creator like yourself?
It's always hard. It's always hard, and the hardest thing always comes down to getting money, right?
Mm,
It's like that's the hardest thing about film is getting money. Orson Welles has talked about this pretty extensively. Like if Orson Welles had a really hard time getting funding for projects and he made some of the best movies ever made, then it's going to be hard for everybody. Yeah. And I think it's been harder recently because there seems to be, like, as we see this maybe bigger gap, right, between the working class and the rich, in terms of just about everything. We're seeing that in film too, where it's now we're kind of in this world, and hopefully this is going to change. Hopefully all of Disney's failures will change this, where it's like you're either making a movie, like the mid-budget movies have sort of like gone to the wayside. You don't really see them that often anymore. You're either making a movie that's like a Blumhouse style film that's like $5 million or less, um, or you're making some grossly overinflated studio film that's like 250, 500 million or $300 million picture. Uh, and if you're independent, yeah, good luck trying to get over $1 million for your budget. That's probably just not going to happen. Back in the late 60s, there were efforts to try to garner new talent by having what they called like $1 million movies.
mm,
They'd give BBS Studios famously, um, would give like up and coming filmmakers like Peter Bogdanovich, like not a whole lot of money to shoot their movies, but creative freedom because they wanted to make something. They wanted movies to be made that were interesting and cool, and try to find new talent. And if that ended up not working out, well, it wasn't a huge loss. And BBS is how we got films like, Easy Rider, which was Dennis Hopper's big. Dennis Hopper had acted quite extensively before that, but that was his directorial debut. The Last Picture Show by Peter Bogdanovich, Five Easy Pieces, and a slew of other films. And around that same time as well, you had Roger Corman sort of at the height of his producing power, and he was making movies also with like Peter Bogdanovich and Martin Scorsese, and Scorsese might have been with someone different, but there were these like producers who could get these directors a bit of money to make these movies. Not a whole lot, but there was creative, but the low budgets allowed the directors to have creative control. We don't really have the infrastructure for that right now. In fact, you kind of see an anti independent infrastructure right now, where say you make a low budget film, like let's say Safety Not Guaranteed, which is directed by Colin Trevorrow. What happens after that is that a studio looks at that and says, hey, he was able to pull this off. Hey, come direct Jurassic World for a 200 something $million budget, because you're an indie director, you're not a studio director, you're not a big name yet, and there's still time to make you like a corporate stooge. And the Marvels director, Nia DaCosta, or whatever her name is, I forget, she'd only made one movie. It was a Candyman remake, so it was a horror film that had a relatively low budget, and then they bring her on to direct the Marvels, and it's like, it's the same reason. It's because she's not some rock star director, so they can like bring her on to this big set and say like, no, this is how things are run around here. Like, this isn't an independent thing, so you got to like take our word for it, because it's really Kevin Feige who's like making these MCU movies, but you get these indie directors in there to be like, yeah, you're the director, sure. Yeah, and we can, but you're really just going to be, we're really going to be calling the shots. Like the executives are going to be calling the shots.
They're easy to control, and
Yeah.
and also like there's a whole brutal like self tryout process where it's like, we'll just wait to see if you make anything good, and then if you do, we'll try to snag you.
Yeah, and then when somebody like, say, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who had success and with like 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, and what was the other movie, the Lego movie, they were brought on to direct Solo, a Star Wars story, and the movie that they were making was not the movie that Lucasfilm wanted. So they had shot a lot of the movie, and then Lucasfilm was like, oh, we don't want this movie. We want, like, this is not the movie that we want. Which kind of boggles my mind, because it's like, didn't you like see their pitch and the script and everything before? Like, how do you get to like 80% of production done when you realize that they're making a Phil Lord and Chris Miller movie and not a Kathleen Kennedy movie? And so they fired they fired Phil Lord and Chris Miller and replaced them with another director who made what Lucasfilm wanted to be made, which probably was not as interesting as the movie that they were making. And that's just, and Colin Trevorrow, I think, was initially set to direct Star Wars episode 9, the really bad one, and I think he said that the script was stupid, and that got him fired, because he wanted to do a rewrite of the script. And so it's kind of like, yeah, you're a corporate stooge here, but you got to know that you basically can't say no to us. What we're seeing in terms of the film economy right now is you either make something super low budget or you make something super high budget. And if you're a person who doesn't like being a part of like a big system and playing corporate games and, you know, uh, being a yes man, you're probably going to be stuck to the really low budget stuff, at least for the time being. And
So are
that's
there
if you can.
any large initiatives right now, or even just individuals that are trying to figure out a
So
solution to this?
So I know Eugene Kotlarenko is currently has this like film fund thing for like, low budget films out in LA to like develop movies and get small budgets for them. Like I think that for the films that they try to raise for, it's like 1 to 2 million or it's something like that. Uh I mean, apart from that, I don't know. Like I if they exist, I haven't heard of them, and that's the only one that I know of. But like it seems like the people that say they want to make this quote unquote anti Hollywood stuff, it's all got this kind of political bias to it. So if you want to make something anti Hollywood, just sign on to the Daily Wire, and I'm like,
Right.
just make a
Daily
Daily
Wire
Wire.
Plus, here you come.
Daily Wire Plus. I was just talking in another episode about how the Daily Wire site sucks so much that when I got a Daily Wire Plus subscription for a month when they released Run Hide Fight, because I had to review it for a show, and at the time that was the only movie they had on Daily Wire Plus, and they were still charging $15 a month. So it's like, I say I got it for a month. I really had it for about 3 days. Like I got it, watched the movie, did the show the next day, and then the next day after that, I tried to unsubscribe. I was like, okay, all right, I paid $15, whatever. I got out of super chats and stuff. I made the money back, so time to unsub. I don't want to like pay $15 a month to watch one movie and one kind of bad movie. And so I go to the website and I'm looking on it and there's no unsubscribe button. And I'm like clicking everywhere. So I call support and the guy's like, "Yeah, we don't have an unsub button." I'm like, "What?" Like,
You're like, is that legal?
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is that legal? And he's like, "Well, we didn't think people would want to unsub." And I'm like, "Well, I do." And then he asked me, "Why do you want to unsub?" I'm like, "I don't want to
None
pay
of your
$15 a."
business.
Well, I just told him I don't want to pay $15 a month to watch one movie. Just sell me the Blu-ray. I mean, I won't buy the Blu-ray because you know I have plenty of bad movies in my catalog, but I'm not sure that I want Daily Wire movies in my catalog.
Mhm.
And so he's like, "Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay, I'll I'll end your subscription." And then I found out because I had to review Lady Ballers, their newest film for a podcast. I found out that I've had the Daily Wire access to Daily Wire Plus for the last 2 years without actually paying for it. Because he didn't actually get rid of my subscription. He just got rid of the payments.
Well, that's pretty good. That's great
Yeah,
service.
yeah. What it's like, wow, man, that's messed up. That's not a good model. Uh, and but yeah, like okay, so when you look at like these movies that are making like anti-Hollywood stuff, it's like you either go right now the only things that exist are like the Angel Studio stuff, which is more like Christian films, and then
Mm.
Daily Wire, which is like boomer conservative uh films that you have to like have this implicit sort of or explicit, not even implicit, uh conservative political leaning to the movies. Neither of those options are something I'm really interested in at all. Um but and I think that I don't really know much about Angel Studio stuff, and I think you and I are friends with one of the guys, Steve. So I mean, that's like his thing. But with like the Daily Wire stuff, I don't want to make boomer conservative movies. I don't want movies with like where I have to tell the audience this is why this movie is conservative, you
Yeah.
know? And it's like, no, I don't want to like demean the audience. I don't want to talk down to them. And I don't even want to have explicit political messages in the film. Like, I'd rather have very muddied political messages where people, no matter where they come from, are going to take out of it what they sort of project onto it. Um,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
I, yeah,
there's always this problem of when like you politicize the art, it inevitably undermines
yeah,
the actual object. And
yeah.
so
Well, it
you
makes
can't
it,
have an explicit political agenda. Like there can be
yeah,
implicit political like commentaries um or observations that come out of a film of a good
yeah,
piece of art. But if
hmm,
you make the film about it, then it's just a propaganda piece.
yeah,
And who
yeah,
wants to see that?
yeah. I'm not interested in making propaganda. I'm interested in making stuff that tends to go more towards universal kind of human, the universal human condition, and then people are going to project onto that their own political biases. But my political biases will inevitably make their way into the film, but that doesn't mean that the film overall is like what I want to make is overall like political. I'd rather make it something that can appeal to as many people as possible, uh, given maybe the subject matter that I'm, you know, given the kind of movie I'm making that might not appeal to everyone. But I guess what I'm saying is I want to make films that appeal to me. And I hate it when it's like they like stop the movie to tell you about the politics of the film.
Right.
And I
Or
can
break the
enjoy,
fourth wall, right?
yeah, and I can really enjoy left-wing movies that are more implicitly left-wing, and I enjoy those way more than explicitly right-wing movies. Or explicitly left-wing movies, you know, if it's like implicit in one sense or another, and it's something that you have to think about to kind of be like, oh, yeah, I guess this movie is maybe has this kind of political leaning to it.
Mhm.
That's not bothersome to me at all. It's bothersome to me when it's in your face about it. I mean, there's right wing, you know, right wing stuff like that, and there's plenty of left wing stuff like that too. Just look at like a lot of Godard's movies where he'll just have some character just rant, like go on this rant about socialism for like 15 minutes, you know, like in a movie, say like Tu Va Bien, which is one of the reasons why I don't really care for Godard so much, and I find Truffaut a far superior film director who touched on a lot of the same stuff as Godard in his films, but did so much more subtly and did so with much more grace, I find.
Mm. So I talked to another filmmaker earlier on in the show a few months back called Brendan Murata. I don't know if you know this guy.
Mm-mm.
So he did a film that I guess was decently popular called American Circumcision. That was like on Netflix and whatever, it's on Amazon Prime now. About sort of like whatever the anti-circumcision movement.
Yeah.
Um, and that film had like kind of a political message, but it's like it's not clear. Like, I mean, I think people can guess that it would lean more conservative, but it's not exactly like a black and white thing. It's
I
just like
don't
people that care about
necessarily
that issue.
I don't necessarily even think it's a conservative thing. I think, you know, being anti-circumcision is just like people have woken up from the mind virus that Dr. Kellogg put into American society.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So I interviewed him a little bit. We didn't actually do the interview about the movie, but we did an interview about a book that he wrote where he tried to like combine critical theory in service of this topic,
yeah.
and that was interesting. But I brought him up not to talk about the political orientation of circumcision, but to mention that He's another guy here in Austin, and I think his films have all been crowdfunded. I mean,
That's
has
definitely a way to
that?
do it now.
Yeah, so that's a viable um fundraising model still. And are there
Um,
big films that come out of that?
I would say that like to crowdfund a movie, uh, there's a lot more work to get done beforehand. So it's not like anybody can crowdfund. You know, if nobody knows who you are, good luck. Like I don't think it's going to happen. If you know really rich people or you know really famous people who can say help spread the word, you know, to their audiences, you know, if you can say like I want to crowdfund this movie. Well, good thing I'm friends with, you know, Red Scare. Good thing I'm friends with, you know, all these streamers. Good thing that I'm friends with all these pundits and whoever who have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of followers on Twitter, who can then say like tell their audience go you know, go throw in $5 or whatever, and then you have your money. Uh, you know, you have to like. There's still a lot of gatekeeping in terms of the crowdfunding. You have to be a name, or you have to at least have, as I said, have really rich friends who will put a lot of money into it, or have famous friends who will basically act as like cheerleaders for the film, and you know, act almost as like executive producers, except you know they're not going to money people, they're just going to their audience and having their audience you know, their massive audiences throw in money. So yeah, you know, crowdfunding, like like say even looking at so Andy Ruse is shooting a film as we speak right now, shooting a film in LA, short film based on a delicious tacos.
Yeah.
uh Asher's directing it,
Mhm.
and they crowdfunded that. And even though it had like Peter Vack is playing as Delicious Tacos. Negative XP is doing the music for it, and you know Asher Penn has a sex mag and everything. When they were and you know, and Andy Ruse is a legend. Um, and when they were crowdfunding it, it was there was a certain point during the crowdfunding that they were like, we don't know if we're actually going to make the money for this. I think they were at like 12,000 out of 20,000 that they needed to do it. And it just kind of sat there stagnating um, for quite some time. So you can either, you know, and all these people are fairly well known. So, I mean, I started to share the thing around to some of my like bigger, more influential friends, but then I did a stream on YouTube with Asher that was like a marathon, like a telethon, you know, type thing to like
Mhm.
raise money for it. And uh we ended up raising, I don't know, a couple thousand maybe on that stream, but it got the momentum rolling for that again. And so like crowdfunding is almost more work than the traditional, you know, funding, because you know, you'd think that like asking somebody like for $5 or $20 or whatever, like it's not that much money, but you're asking them to give you money in hopes that, you know, for a future product. And the other problem with crowdfunding is that you're asking them to invest money with no return on investment, other than they can maybe get some merch and they can get
Right.
early access to the film, and people don't even know how the film is going to turn out. They don't know how the film is going to turn out. They don't even know if the film is going to be made. Like, you know, uh usually with like investors, you have some sort of like insurance uh document that you have to sign that essentially ensures that you have to make the film. You have to make
Mhm.
it. And you don't do this with crowdfunding. So it's kind of a hard sell. Even that like $5 from a random person is kind of a hard sell. It's like they could use that $5 on a latte. They would get that
Yeah,
latte right then, and they
right.
have like that immediate like, yep, this is a latte. I can enjoy it right now. Whereas $5 into Delicious Tacos movie, I believe we raised the money like a year ago and they're shooting it today.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to come out for another month or so. It's my guess. And you know, so that's even a very hard sell. And I think that we're now like one of the problems with crowdfunding now is that a lot of people have been burned by crowdfunding ventures where people will kickstart or they'll use Indiegogo to have some product that they end up just not releasing at all, or they crowdfund a movie that ends up being trash and people like are like, man, I put like $500 into this and this sucks, you know and because you're kind of like you're you're asking people to take sort of a liability on it, and whether it might not be made at all, and the money might be squandered, you might not get it back, or like you get it and you're like, I put this money into it and it's like this.
Right.
you know
So you think the traditional investor model is actually just cleaner in some ways?
it is cleaner.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is cleaner. I mean, I think that like new directors shouldn't be afraid of things like product placement as well, because product placement, they give you a sum of cash to be like, okay, have our stuff in the movie, and then that's all they care about is just people see the film, people see the brand, right, within
Hmm.
the movie. And I mean, so like, and for example, like if say a beer company wanted to do product placement in a movie of mine, or a whiskey company or something, that honestly would work better, because I'd rather have like a real bottle of whiskey, say, or a real beer brand that people are drinking in the movie, than have like the fake, like there's like these vinyl overlays that you can put over like a whiskey bottle, or paper and vinyl overlays you can put over like a whiskey bottle or beer bottle, that are just like the fake brands used for movies. For me, that just makes it more realistic anyways. um the Truman Show kind of had a little visual gag about this, where when Truman's friend shows up with a six-pack of beer, his cans are just these white cans that say beer on them.
Hmm.
uh and it's so obviously fake. So sometimes you can make something like product placement just work to your advantage. I believe that's how Fincher got a lot of money for The Killer, was there's a lot of product placement in the film. But he is a guy working in this kind of modern, like post-industrial society that is, these large corporations are everywhere, and that's kind of part of the movie. So it makes sense within the confines of the movie that, say, he'd be using Amazon Prime to get to get the stuff that he uses to assassinate people. uh and but as yeah, traditional investors is definitely cleaner. The risk is higher though, you know,
Hmm.
because um the risk is higher for traditional investors, just because you do have to go back. Like if it's a crowd, right? And say the movie doesn't perform well, you don't have any like fiduciary duty to them. Your only duty is just to make the thing. Whereas with a traditional investor, you do have a fiduciary duty. You do, like, you want to be able to go back and say, we made a profit. Now here's your money back, right? Here's your split of the profit. If the movie doesn't make a profit, that's a pretty hard it's a pretty hard conversation to have.
Right, right.
you know.
So, you watched The Killer recently, and you
hmm
really liked it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. What did you like about it?
Uh, I have a video coming out,
Yeah, I
and
know. It's a teaser.
uh, well, I don't think it's Fincher's best.
Hmm.
But I found it to be an interesting movie, especially an interesting movie on uh, just the sort of modern life and modern gig work culture,
Hmm.
where it's kind of like the modern life has sucked the soul out of everybody, and Fassbender's character, the unnamed killer, is a stand-in for I guess a lot of people in the workplace now. uh, you know, I've seen him described as like a McKinsey consultant turned hitman, and that's pretty apt. And
It's
it's
very easy to imagine.
yeah, exactly. It's not too far from reality, really, when you think about it. Yeah, have you met those guys? They're a little weird. But he Fincher really plays into this genre of film about like modern samurai, but he inverts a lot of it to make it even more soulless. But I like that, you know, he's making it more like the genre of film includes, and I talk about this in the video, Melville's classic film *Les Samurai*, which starred Alain Delon in the late '60s, and Jim Jarmusch's film *Ghost Dog*, which starred Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai, which starred Forrest Whitaker. And the hitman sort of falls into a similar, I mean, structurally, in a lot of different ways. It's very similar to these films, but like those movies, you know, these characters live by the Bushido, this kind of chivalric ideal. And in The Killer, he lives by his own sort of, it kind of feels like a corporate memo, you know. And so like any kind of notion of ancient, I mean, I know that the Bushido is not exactly ancient, but pre-modern, pre-modern ideals, any kind of notion of honor, any kind of notion of just like being able to be the best man that you can be while being a warrior is completely gone in The Killer, and it's replaced by how can I be as efficient as possible, you know.
Hmm.
And his whole thing is like, they hire me because I don't give a fuck, you know. I don't care, like nothing in the world matters, nothing I do matters. I make money by doing this. This is my gig. How can I make it as efficient? How can I make it as efficient as possible? And you know, and he works in this like hyper consumerist world, and he, you know, and I, not to spoil it, but things go awry, and he thinks he's sort of like fighting the system to a point, but he's also completely enveloped by the system while fighting for it. Like, for example, using Amazon to get some of his assassin tools, you know,
Hmm.
using renting cars from Hertz, getting supplies at Ace Hardware, you know, uh, like using Postmates to sneak into an apartment, you know. And it kind of, there's this thread throughout the film on how like we live in this like global panopticon, and how everything is so interconnected, and that interconnectedness actually puts us more at risk of people like Fassbender's killer, where it's easier now more than ever to say find out where somebody lives, or
Right.
get into their, you know, get into their house, uh because like the things like RFID, you know, locks and whatnot are so easily uh like easily worked around, that you know, we have it's basically like the a lot of these security systems that people have now are just to tell themselves that um you know, to tell themselves that they're safe when they're not. um
Hmm.
and so yeah, so there's a lot of commentary on sort of the modern state of people in that. But what I took away, what I liked the most about it, is that it kind of works complementary to Fight Club, um, and that like whereas in Fight Club it kind of ends with this sort of like, oh yeah, we're blowing up the buildings, Project Mayhem is a go, and we're able to fight against the system and the killer. It's the attitude is more like the system is so big, it's so like it's almost impenetrable. Like he works for these like really top guys, right? The people who are calling the hits now are not like governments. It's not the mafia. It's hedge fund dudes. You know,
Hmm.
it's it's super rich guys who have more power than probably, you know, the politicians they pay off. And and he doesn't even know who they are. You know, it's also just like this faceless, soulless system. Um, you know, it's almost like Uber for him. Like he gets a thing on his phone that tells him, "All right, this is your next target." He doesn't know who's paying for it. He doesn't know why he has to kill the person. It's just like, you know, it's like on an Uber ride. Like this person has requested a ride, you know, and you're just
Right,
like,
right.
okay, click,
It's
yes,
it, it's extremely impersonal, and you're just sort
yeah,
of like in the flow of this mesh of like networks.
yeah, exactly. You're in the flow of this mesh of these networks, which has given the people in power way more power.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's really cool. I mean, I won't urge you to divulge too much while we wait for the when we wait for the you know
yeah,
the video to
yeah.
come out. But
I'm shooting the last bit of it today, but it's mostly edited. So
all
I'm
right.
hoping to have a cut for my patrons tonight, but I know that that's wishful thinking. Uh,
Hmm.
because I every time I edit, I'll look at my timeline. I'll be like, it looks fully edited. Looks fully edited to me. Looks fine. And then I start looking at it, I'm like, I want to change this. I want to change this. And then before I know it, 9 hours later,
Yeah.
you know, it's I've completely changed the whole video. That happens almost every time. So
Yeah. Well, one interesting thing to just note, because I was surprised I shouldn't have been when you initially brought up Fight Club, because I was actually thinking about American Psycho. That's
mm,
what it sounded like initially.
yeah,
Um, you mentioned about how he's sort of like in this system in every possible way, right? And sort
yeah,
of sounds like a lot of it is about him going deeper into it or co-opting it for these purposes. Whereas in Fight Club, there's like a clear distinction. There's like a bifurcation of realms, right? So there's the main character, and then there's Tyler Durden, and
yeah,
the whole thing is like about separating those two lives, sort of completely, right? And you don't really, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on where he's at work or doing things related to his work. There's just sort of this other life that he has.
yeah,
Um, Whereas in this, it's like totalizing.
yeah, yeah. It's a bit, you know, like it takes. Yeah, I would say that, you know, American Psycho is also an influence, but the character of the killer has a lot more humanity than Bateman does, because part of the movie is him sort of is like he's a Raskolnikov type at the beginning, where he thinks he's like this Nietzschean Ubermensch, right, at the beginning of the film, and he thinks that's what allows him to do this, and sort of the his character arc is uh figuring out that he isn't. Um,
Mm,
and his character arc is so his character arc is finding this kind of happiness and sort of at the end rejecting this nihilistic worldview that he has in service of this new economy. Um, you know, that the nihilistic attitude helped him in this new economy, but it's kind of like a breakdown. The film is kind of following his like breakdown, that philosophical worldview kind of breaking down as he realizes it goes against his own humanity. And it's about him trying to suppress his own humanity, and then he just can't after events that happen.
mm,
Um, and uh, and so like that's why I don't think I would put it with American Psycho, because Patrick Bateman just doesn't have humanity to begin with. You know, he is like this shell of a person
right.
who's all superficial. It's all masks. that he wears, like, because he wears these different masks because to conceal the fact that there's really nothing behind the masks. Um, Whereas the killer, he's more of a three dimensional person that reminds me of, like, what if Tyler Durden and the main character from Fight Club fused, but then were like ground into submission by the system. So he has both in him, but it's all in service of the system now. It's all to get the IKEA furniture.
Mhm.
It's, you know, it's that chaos and that order, but now it's like this, you know, Project Mayhem couldn't really do anything now. In fact, they took his Project Mayhem and now the elites are using it for their own ends.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, are there any movies that you can think of? They could be past, they could be more recent, that are apocryphal for thinking about the future.
Apocryphal about the future, like they have a vision of the future that is not accurate. Um,
Um, I believe I misstated that. Let me ask you again.
yeah, because
So,
every time I've heard apocryphal, it's like, oh, this apocryphal text, because it's like, like the Gnostic text and
yeah,
whatnot.
yeah. So like there are like a number, like Her was kind of like this, where people were like, "Oh, this is a movie that like is showing us a realistic depiction of like what's coming." And that's really what I meant. I guess the
Yeah,
opposite of apocryphal.
yeah.
I don't know why that word came to my head.
The yeah, I made a video on Her, and it's the easiest video I could ever make. Uh, I remember Isaac Isaac texts me after and he's like, who's the wigger at the beginning?
No, because
So
like so I had a conversation a long time, 2 years ago on my last show with Zero HP Lovecraft,
yeah.
where I asked him um whether he was interested in writing optimistic sci-fi, right? Like whether there were
Mhm.
sci-fi visions of the future that don't just end in like horror. Because he's a horrorist. And
Yeah.
um, I don't remember exactly what his answer was, but more or less it was like, we're not trying to create happy endings here. Um, and I don't really care necessarily whether you have an optimistic or pessimistic view of the future. It does to me seem like we are moving into um a phase where there's a lot of nostalgia on one side. So there's
Hmm.
like infinite nostalgia. That's one big thing. And then the other trend is that we are moving into like a more future focused uh vibe. I feel as if there's a
Well,
techno optimist strain going on.
yeah,
Um, so I just
that's
wanted to
like
ask about movies that you think have
that's
interesting
like
depictions of the future.
effective accelerationism. Uh, yeah, is like kind of more techno optimist.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying about Her, like those, disgraced propagandist Isaac, is like, who's the wigger at the beginning?
Yeah.
That's my friend Cumby, but because the video that I made on Her was almost entirely AI generated, because I wanted to see like where is AI now versus where the AI in Her starts off. But I started off with like just a goofy sketch. I had some yacht rock song playing, and it was like my Valentine's Day video, and it's my friend Cumby, who's another YouTuber. He was staying over at my place for this event, this stand-up show that he was doing here in Austin, and and I show him on a very romantic date with Replica AI.
Mhm.
The like the
Yeah.
chat, yeah, and that was like literally the day before when we were shooting that. They really uh cut Replica's sex stuff and love stuff because they got, I guess, weirded out that so many people actually believed that they were in a relationship with Replica.
Mhm.
So so it's him on the couch, like having a romantic date with my laptop, and and then it goes into this video essay on Her, but the essay was written by ChatGPT, and then my voiceover was done by 11 Labs.
Hmm.
So I just took
Right.
I just took a bunch of stuff from like raw audio from I went back into the Premiere profiles and took like raw audio of my voice and fed it into 11 Labs and had to clone my voice. Uh, the clips that I show above it aren't like I put in the clips. I so the clips were not AI made, but I just had clips from her playing. And then I ended it with asking people if they noticed that it was AI generated, and was reading the comments, and it was really interesting to see how like what people thought. Some people got fooled by the voice, some people got fooled by the text, some people weren't fooled by either. um so it was kind of strange, and I did it more as a thought experiment to see like, where's AI now, where do we think it's going in the future, is it going to be as like, it wasn't a video where I'm like trying to explain her or anything. It's more of a video of just trying to get people to think about the state of AI
Mhm.
almost a year ago, um and think like where it could go in the future. I mean, it's a short video. It was a fun video to make, though. I mean, not that much work. I just, uh, but as far as like techno, like optimist, I mean, I tend to really like the in art. I tend to like stuff that's not optimistic about the future, just because I think that part of what sci-fi does, and like the cyberpunk genre does, especially, is look at what we have right now and then say pushes that, say, 20, 30 years in the future, and shows where it can all go wrong, and it kind of serves as like a warning for, say, people nowadays to be like, maybe we should have a limit on this,
Hmm.
maybe we shouldn't be doing this right now. And I think that like, as far as movies and books go, stuff that's more techno optimist might be more might make it uh more likely that we move towards a dark futurist, because it's like, oh, everything is great, and so
Right.
then the culture is like, everything we're doing is really great, actually. Let's just keep going with this. Let's keep making Skynet. you know
Yeah. Right. Right.
and and
Plug
so,
in, drop out.
yeah,
You could-
the stuff that's more horror focused, I think, is actually trying to lead to a more optimistic future by kind of getting people who are making these new technologies to think about the repercussions of their products.
Hmm.
Um, and so I tend to be, as far as tech goes, I don't know if I'm really an optimist or a pessimist in either way. Like, I can't say that I'm somebody who can predict the future, and if I was, I wouldn't be a YouTuber. I'd be paid a lot more money.
You saw Asteroid City this summer.
Yeah.
That was like literally the only movie I saw in theaters this year. Um, I didn't go see Barbie. I didn't go see Oppenheimer. I thought it was interesting that Asteroid City and Oppenheimer were out at the same time, because they sort of overlap in their themes. What did you think of Asteroid City?
I really liked it. It does have that. So I saw it a couple times. I went. It's like U.S. premiere was at Austin Film Society,
Hmm.
um, and so I went to the U.S. premiere of it. But I had already, before I even knew about the U.S. premiere, uh, which I think, yeah, it was only for AFS members. Before I even knew about it, I had like bought a ticket to see it at the Draft House like 2 weeks later. So I already had a ticket to see it like when it officially came out. So I saw it twice in theaters, and I liked it a lot better on the second watch. There's a lot in there, and it is interesting that it came out around the same time as Oppenheimer, because both deal with like the whole like nuclear, nuclear bombs, and the atomic age. And Asteroid City is sort of like this vision of the atomic age, uh, that almost feels like a movie that you could see playing in Fallout.
Yeah.
you know, uh, them casually watching atomic bomb explosions from the diner uh, during the movie, and I feel like it kind of goes what Asteroid City was going for. I mean, I think that above all, Asteroid City is sort of a self reflection on Wes Anderson himself, or I guess that's redundant, but it's Wes Anderson self reflecting in a lot of ways because you know you know it's all kind of wrapped in this play, and Adrian Brody is sort of the Wes Anderson character who is kind of obsessed with his work, and so then the movie that is the play is almost like this like heightened version of a Wes Anderson film. It's already you know his films are already heightened, but Asteroid City is like almost even more so. And you know, and you have cutting between the color cinemascope of Asteroid City and then the black and white Academy ratio of the '50s theater troupe that's based on you know it's one famous theater acting school from the '50s, and so like I think that it's a lot of Wes Anderson sort of just reflecting on himself. I mean, like when you look into Wes Anderson's childhood, you know, he would put on these plays at a school that was like the Alamo, uh, or like these like big production plays, you know, for a school project that would, you know, you try to go all out. Like Rushmore was a bit about, you know, was definitely about this. Um, so it's him looking at that, and then there is this kind of nostalgia factor uh for the '50s, '60s atomic age era, uh and this kind of optimism for technology for the future, where it's like all these you know all these bright young kids are making you know like these laser guns and these things that can project stuff onto the moon, but there's a little bit of cynicism thrown in there as well. Like he's like he put the American flag on the moon as part of his
Yeah.
project, and they're like, this is going to start like this is going to heat up tensions with the Soviet Union, you know. And then I think near the end he's like, oh yeah, we're going to use it for advertising. You know, we can put
Yeah.
the we can put the Coca-Cola logo up there, you know, and and
It's like the orb in Vegas.
yeah, exactly. So there's like a little bit of cynicism thrown in there. What really kind of got me about that movie is how it's like an anti-quarantine film,
Right.
uh, where it's about all these people going stir crazy and then rebelling against the U.S. government that has them in quarantine. So like it's a movie that definitely is like I think about this whenever there's a period piece, especially like a fictional period piece like Asteroid City, is that he's using this period setting for various reasons, but he's really commenting on today. So I think that there's a lot of contemporary commentary on Asteroid City that he's especially like in light of COVID. I think he's commenting more on that than he is commenting on how things actually were in the '50s or '60s, and he kind of creates this idealized version of the '50s or '60s to sort of couch uh, his sort of more modern ideas, um, or contemporary ideas, I guess. But yeah, it was interesting in that he doesn't, you know, he never gets too like. There's always a sense of melancholy to everything he does. So he doesn't show it like, oh, here's this. Everyone was super happy back then. No, it like opens up with like the kids finding out that their mom died and
Yeah.
tensions between all the different family members, and you know, very kind of real, like human. Without also falling into the trappings that like say some contemporary people want to look back on, say like the '40s or some '40s or '50s, and they're like, oh yeah, all the heads of the family were secretly gay, everybody was actually a drug addict, this very, very cynical look. It's more of a realist look, but sort of in this like hyper real scenario. Um, and so I think that there is the nostalgia, I would say, of Asteroid City is more in its aesthetics
Yeah.
and its characters or story.
Well, what's interesting is that the characters are like very they're almost extremely moderated. Like there's no melodrama going on, even though they're in a completely absurd situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're like normal people in a really ridiculous situation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Taking the zapper guns out to like skeet shoot. you know, like how long are we gonna be here? How
Yeah.
long can they hold us as they're just like shooting skeet with lasers? And it's like they're not even thinking about the absurdity of their situation. And also I found it was funny that like an alien comes down and it's like this huge event and the alien only comes down to like inventory this meteorite.
Right.
He just basically puts a little like barcode on it and then he leaves. And it's like it's absurdity and it's mundanity at the same time. And it's
Mhm.
almost like, yeah, an absurd such situation, but then everything about it is mundane. And honestly, that's kind of realistic, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
absurd stuff in real life is actually quite mundane in how it plays out. That is, it's not melodramatic. Like he wasn't taking from like Douglas Sirk or from Todd Haynes or from these like big melodrama directors. Like I know that he was very influenced by like John Huston and they had a series at AFS and I went and watched all of them. It's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This one John Huston movie with Marilyn Monroe. I forgot what it was called. It was a good movie though. And I forgot what the third film was that they had play there. But um, yeah, he's definitely like I would say, yeah, basically he's using nostalgia as the aesthetic, and he's using that to kind of get the audience in the world, and then kind of turning things up and making it more absurd and absurd and
Mhm.
absurd, while keeping his own sort of dry wit and eye for like the mundane within that. I mean, you even look at his other films, uh, say Moonrise Kingdom. You know, that takes a very mundane situation of like, oh, uh, you know, a Boy Scout decided to run away with his girlfriend. You know, they didn't know he had a girlfriend, and it's kind of like, you start to think of it, and you're like, how is this really much of a story, and how is this going to get absurd? And it just keeps getting absurd, but the characters don't really notice the absurdity of their situation. They're still sort of bogged down in their own like interpersonal relationships and small town life and everything, the entire time. uh you also see that in like I mean Rushmore, where the absurdity in Rushmore is really from the plays that he puts on, that you're like, no way that this would be a high school play. Like he has a whole like Vietnam set, here, and explosions and stuff, and people are just kind of like dryly like noting like wow, it's a good play. Like not
Mhm.
like he has flamethrowers in a high school. uh and nobody really seems to care. They just put on their sunglasses for the explosion, like it's any other day. um yeah, I liked Asteroid City quite a bit. And I liked his Netflix movies that he came out with this year too. He made like 4 short films
Mhm.
for Netflix, which is unfortunate. I talk about that in my killer video. One of the unfortunate things about streaming, getting into maybe the economy of movies now, is back in the day, back in like the late aughts, early 2010s, I remember filmmakers like Mark Duplass, Joe Swanberg, they were talking about how um, like the way to make it as an indie filmmaker would be to make a really low budget movie. Like Duplass made The Puffy Chair. Swanberg made, I mean, between the two of them, they made a bunch of these like mumblecore movies. And they were like, just sell it to Netflix, because Netflix was like buying all these like indie movies. And he's like, you sell it to Netflix, it'll get seen by a lot of people. You'll get more work off of that. You know, Duplass obviously got like his show, The League, off of the fame that he got from streaming, from streaming on Netflix. And now that's not really the case, because Netflix is sort of its own production company, but Netflix still does like buy movies. So I believe Netflix produced The Killer. I'm not sure that they produced Wes Anderson's films, and I know that they bought Linklater's new film, Hitman. And it got a lot of people talking, because Netflix back in the day was like, wow, this is this great new service. It makes watching movies so much easier. You know, it makes watching movies way more convenient. But what people have noticed in the past years is that making it more convenient has made the films less culturally relevant. And that, say, when Netflix releases a TV show, and they kind of created the binge model.
Yeah.
Is that they would like drop a new season of whatever TV show. People would all binge it like that weekend that it dropped. People would be talking about it on Twitter, Facebook, whatever, real life. And then a week later, it's as if it never happened. It's as if it never released. And it's just kind of the same thing with a lot of movies, where it's like everyone watches it the day that it drops or the weekend that it drops. And then it's like people just instantly forget about it. It becomes disposable content. You know, and so, you know, if you're able to sell your movie to Netflix, it doesn't necessarily hold the same cultural cachet that, say, it used to. Because
where it would be in theaters for months, and you know,
yeah,
people, and then there'd be an at-home release, and then people would follow up with that. And
yeah, drawing things out definitely makes it more culturally relevant. You know, Twin Peaks: Return, you know, was a weekly release on Showtime, and sometimes it would play 2 episodes. It was like Sunday nights, and sometimes they would play two episodes, but mostly they would play like 1 episode at a time. And then I believe there was like a mid-season break, because it was like 18 episodes. So it was being talked about for like half a year, you know. And now Twin Peaks: Return is still talked about. Like, if, say, they release Twin Peaks: Return straight to Netflix, all 18 episodes, I'm not sure that it would have the same effect. It would have the same lasting power. And I know that that's why some of these streaming sites have kind of ditched the binge model of things. I know that like Netflix tried to do that with Stranger Things season 2, but in a sort of a half-hearted way, or not season 2, whatever the newest season is, season 4, where they released like every episode but like the last 2 episodes on one day, and then they're like, oh, in 6 weeks the last 2 episodes are going to release. So they were trying to kind of draw that out, but still it didn't quite work. I know Amazon, with a lot of their shows now, are releasing them week by week. You know, they're releasing them week by week to try to fight you know, this trend. But making it's as if making things more convenient to consume also just makes them way more disposable, and makes them less powerful culturally than they are otherwise, if you know, through more traditional means. And I think that's one of the reasons why these quote unquote anti-Hollywood people are not doing it correctly, because Daily Wire, right? Going back to Daily Wire, like, they have their own streaming service, so they release a movie to stream, and you know, but you see like another like conservative movie from this year, which was Sound of Freedom, that didn't go straight to streaming. that played in theaters and became like the big conservative movie of the year. It made a lot of money,
Mhm.
um, because they were playing in theaters and they really used word of mouth to get people to see it. And people were, like you know, I don't know the last time my parents like went to the movies and texted me, "This is so powerful, you have to see it," and I kind of waited a long time to like go see it, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out, because like all my parents and their boomer friends were being like, "Peter, I know you're a movie guy, you got to see this new
Yeah,
movie,"
right, right.
but like no one does that with the Daily Wire movies, because it's like, oh, they put it on streaming. Daily Wire audience, I mean, it's the same problem as Netflix. They all watch it the same day or the same weekend,
Mm.
and then it's like forgotten. Like nobody remembers Shut In. I mean, heck, people don't even remember Run, Hide, Fight or Terror on the Prairie or their other films that they made.
Yeah.
They and they're only in that case too. They're only playing to the audience that Daily Wire Plus already has, which might be a big audience, but if they want to affect the culture, it's like, okay, you're just throwing red meat at your audience. You're not doing anything meaningful.
Yeah. All right. So stepping away from Daily Wire,
Yeah,
Daily Wire plus
good.
criticism. Um, you really like piqued my interest both with this conversation, and honestly, I was actually pretty excited because when I first met you, because when I met you it was actually when I found out about your channel. I think I had
Yeah.
seen it a few times before that, but didn't really pay attention. And in my own personal life, I'm kind of a lapsed cinephile in that like
Hmm.
I was really into film in like mostly in high school, and then it sort of faded away over time. And now that I've like, you know, started talking to you and I looked at your channel and I've seen some of your videos and stuff, I'm like, oh crap, I gotta like I'm missing all these films, right? Like, and not only films that are more current, but also there's a whole backlog, of course, of classic films that are on my list that I like need to get around to see, right? Like I haven't seen
Yeah.
Metropolitan, for example.
Oh, it's
Um,
great. It's a great one.
so so I'm gonna ask you,
Yeah.
um, five masterpiece recommendations to like go see right now.
Okay. 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 Uh, Let me think for a second. So number one would be Orson Welles' The Trial.
Okay.
Orson Welles' The Trial. You got it. Everyone has to see that. That's probably one of his most underseen movies. It just got a new 4K restoration. I saw that in the theater. I saw the new restoration in the theater. I'd seen the movie before, but the restoration did a really good job, because the version I saw initially was not very good. It was very much like needed some work done to it. So The Trial, uh, classic, classic movies.
They don't
What are
have to
we?
be classic, just five masterpieces.
Five masterpieces. Oh, okay. Let me look up my
I know you've
my.
done 10 before. That's why I'm asking you this.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to do like stuff that I haven't talked about on my channel yet. Uh, Let me go to see what I gave 5 stars to on my letterboxd here. Uh, yeah, The Trial. Let me see here. Well, everyone's probably seen Apocalypse Now. I don't want to just give a whole bunch of Orson Welles movies here. Pasolini's Theorem or
All right.
Teorema. Some of these might be a little. Some of these movies might be esoteric. Teorema is a bit esoteric. Well, I've already talked about the Brown Bunny extensively. I already talked about Underground. Oslo, August 31st.
All right.
Um, Let me see here. Uh, Workmeister Harmonies by Belatar. And crap. Let me think of a fifth one that's like American. Because I could say any kind of Bresson movie, but I have a video on all of Bresson's films. Everyone knows Tarkovsky, so I don't think I need to tell people to go watch Tarkovsky. Uh, I talked about Walking the Streets of Moscow already, which is already pretty great. Uh, I'll say Here is American Japanese Mishima: A Life in Four Chapters.
Okay, great. There's a Mishima
Yeah,
film at the end. All right.
yeah,
Well, that's
yeah,
that's pretty awesome. We got way more than five out of that because, of course, a good percentage of my audience doesn't necessarily know all the stuff that you like talking about. So, um,
yeah. Well, they start with the Mishima movie.
okay, good. This is great. We're gonna start with the Mishima movie, even though
Yeah.
we're uh we're not going to be political.
Yeah. I mean, the Mishima movie that was directed and written by Paul Schrader,
Mhm.
who wrote Raging Bull and Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really interesting how it's about his life, but it also adapts some of his works within his life. And I like Mishima's fiction writing quite a bit. Um, so it's a nice blend of like biopic, but also fiction adaptation. It's
Yeah.
it's it's very different from many other movies I've seen. I think it's on the Criterion channel. I know I have the Criterion Blu-ray of it. So, and if you want to pair that with something, there's Mishima's short film Patriotism. That's definitely a Mishima short film because it's all about a guy committing harakiri.
Hmm.
It's a very brutal harakiri film, but it's like a silent movie where it's like about a Japanese imperial officer, of course, who
Yes.
after Japan loses, he and his wife, they have sex, of course, and then he commits harakiri, and then she kills herself too. Um, so it's standard Mishima.
It's very, very uplifting.
Yeah.
Um, well, this has been a really fun tour through movies and film history and the industry itself. Um, and I really loved it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.